Are you familiar with Colin Liddell or Colin? Have you heard of Kevin? I guess you're both from the British Isles, but
Oh wow, you're
Colin,
both in Japan. That's mad. Yeah, I didn't even realize that you're both from Japan. Sorry.
Colin's a
Colin,
popular.
welcome to the show.
Yeah, he's a
Yeah,
popular
hello. Can you hear
commentator,
me?
Hello, Colin.
international
Yeah, loud and
politics
clear.
expert, author.
Great.
Are you familiar with Kevin, Colin?
No, I'm not.
Well,
Well,
you are now, I guess.
You are now
Both
in
currently-
interesting circles, but he's
Yep. Both
are you
currently
also in the Far East?
expats.
Are you also expat? I mean, Kevin in Japan.
You're asking me? Yeah, I'm.
No, I'm asking
expat.
Colin. I think he also is in the Far East.
Well, I get around the world a bit, yeah.
And could I ask? Your name seems incredibly familiar to me, and
I'll introduce Colin. I've done some videos on this. I hope he doesn't mind me taking the mic a minute. Colin Liddell is one of the original three spokes who started the alt-right back in the day, by starting the site with Richard Spencer, alternativerights.blogspot.com back in the day with him, Richard Spencer, and Andy Nowicki. So one of the OGs.
And Kevin, Colin, you hadn't heard. Kevin was originally red pilled a long time ago by Mark Collett in the grooming gangs. That was his first entrance into dissident politics.
Yeah. Well, Mark Collett's a bit of an idiot in my opinion. So,
well, let me tell you what happened. So, I was outside of the UK when it happened. I grew up in Peterborough. I knew that there was a Muslim problem because I had to grow up in that region, Gladstone Street, Russell Street, etc. in that area. One of my next door neighbor was one of 6 lads who killed Ross Parker 3 weeks after 9/11. We already knew about the grooming gangs, etc. I knew Islam was a problem. And in that time period when the British National Party were the only people who were talking about the mass grooming of English young girls, and they were being essentially pulled through the court system again and again, trying to be destroyed legally and financially, I sent them a donation for, it was 50 quid. And then about the BNP list being released, etc. And my name was on that as a donor/member. And I made the.
Was that the WikiLeaks?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was.
Thanks, Julian Assange.
Yeah, Julian Assange is. I was not a happy bunny with that individual, but I would say that was less Julian Assange and more the British state engaging in activities designed to try and crush the popular following that the BNP were beginning to amass as they were talking about this very real and serious problem with respect to Islamic.
I'm very, very familiar with this trajectory, but I guess from the British state's point of view, they wanted to deal with this problem too, but in a less polarizing and divisive way.
Just to shorten the introduction and make the important points, Kevin is streaming at the same time and has over 100 live viewers on his Rumble. Although he's more famous for being a neuroscientist who studied in the U.S. and in fact, Bar-Ilan in Israel, and is a published author on many papers involving biological warfare origins of SARS-CoV-19, although he has overlap opinions of, maybe like alt-right dissident opinions that is not necessarily what he's best known for. And maybe at a different point, Colin could be a guest on Kevin's channel, who is live streaming the same broadcast with over 100 viewers now.
And just for everybody's attention, SJJ is streaming on a monetized YouTube channel, so we can only talk about certain things to a certain extent.
But
so,
yes, to not waste too much time with the introductions, if you wanted to jump straight into your analysis of the Israeli war, and then maybe Kevin could have
go ahead, Colin.
Guess at a later point.
Oh, my battery's run out on my vape. Could you carry on, gentlemen? I'll be. 30 seconds whilst I just go and grab a set of batteries. I'll be back. Sorry, it's early in the morning for me. I need to get nicotine levels up. Excuse me.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting situation, isn't it? Because everybody's
It is.
been expecting the IDF to go in, and I think it's let's see, it started on the 7th, and it's now the 25th of October.
Is it 19 days or something?
Yeah, and still they're kind of like biding their time and doing their final preparations. And the big question is, will they go in? And I think they're probably better off not going in. I think if they did go in, there'd be a lot of casualties. So it could get quite messy. Things could get quite heated. And I guess probably Netanyahu probably wants that to happen. He wants things to get as heated and as hysterical as possible. He probably wants Hezbollah to get involved. And then he wants America to kind of come in and cover his ass.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, the elephant in the room here is all this military hardware heading into the region, and all it takes is one thing for it to pop off. And if, as I've heard on this show, lots of conspiratorial theories about how it started have been put forward, either on the side of Iran and Hamas and China or Russia, or on the side of the Israelis and Netanyahu having foreknowledge, maybe. If any of these groups have planned this to some big extent, then we could be waiting for like a stage 2 for it to pop off. And, you know, God forbid a false flag of some kind, such as like, pinned on Iran or on Lebanon, and then that's it. It's all kicking off, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of these things are to do with domestic politics. And I mean, like in the case of Putin, one of the reasons he went into the Ukraine was to shore up his position in Russia in various ways. I think there's a bit of that with Netanyahu. You know, this is his way of surviving politically in Israel. He's been in too long. A lot of people are heartily sick of him. There's sort of grown opposition towards Netanyahu. There was a massive protest movement against him. Netanyahu's had to get into bed with some more and more extreme and hard to manage partners. And so his sort of domestic political position is sort of hollowing out and becoming more fragile over time. And this kind of war is actually beneficial to him from a domestic political point of view. Although that could also blow up in his face.
So, with that in mind, you would expect, if that was the case, let's say, I'm not saying you're saying that Netanyahu planned this or let it happen, but if any of that was the case, we really are waiting for a stage 2. There's these American carriers heading there. I think one's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean as we speak. The other one is already there. All it would take is for one false flag, wouldn't it, just to light the fireworks on this thing. God forbid we mention USS Liberty or anything like that, but I have heard it mentioned or anything like that. Just one incident portrayed as one of the main players, such as Iran or Lebanon, and then boom, the bonfire's lit, isn't it?
Well, I think it's kind of pretty hard to pull off a false flag because there's a lot of surveillance on everything now. And so anything false would be detected. So I think it's more likely that, what happens is Netanyahu orders the IDF into the West Bank. Things start to get messy. A lot of people, innocent civilians, start to get killed. The Israelis start to use particularly nasty weapons, maybe napalm or even poison gas or something.
Yeah, I'm thinking gas for those tunnels. That's what I think may be the move here.
And if that happens, then of course Hezbollah are going to think they've got a duty to step in, and it kicks off on the northern border. And then of course, meanwhile, the Arabs in the West Bank getting incredibly excited, and so you get this sort of escalation, and then the Americans have sent their fleets there to sort of kind of calm things down and manage things, but this is also an opportunity for Netanyahu to try to get the Americans to come into the war on his side. And so, if Hezbollah are threatening Israel from the north, then the Americans might, against their better wishes, get sucked in to sort of defend Israel. And that would be, exactly what Netanyahu would like. He wants America to sort of fight his war on his behalf.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is they don't want Jewish Israeli casualties in this, and the simple fact is that you're looking at a much larger Bakhmut type situation on the coast of the Mediterranean that's far more ideologically charged than the Ukraine conflict, and where that ends up, who knows? Maybe there are people who this is I keep saying this in this conversation, which is you cannot remove the ideological, religious, eschatological component from this conflict. As much as we would like to just think about it in terms of canonical geopolitics, etc., that element exists there, and I would put forward the premise that until you solve, and I don't think you can, the schisms between the different messianic worldviews, you're always going to have conflict there. And you made the point that Netanyahu has had to climb into bed with more hardline, again, messianic types. That this is what they want it. They want this conflict because it's a reflection, or they think it's a reflection of their underlying scripture and eschatology manifesting, so that their Messiah, whichever one you want to pick, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, comes down and instantiates their new epoch, new age. And how you solve that, I don't know.
Well, we talked about that at the beginning, and I kind of punted on it. But to come back to it, and then hopefully we'll get Colin's opinion on the possibility of expulsion and whether Israel has a chance of expulsion. But from the eschatological level, Israel has to take control of the Temple Mount, which is now controlled by Jordan and the East Jerusalem, that is under Jewish occupied control, but is majority Palestinian, that goes straight into the Temple Mount. So Gaza is maybe important. You could argue biblically whether having like a pure Israel and expelling the Gazans matters for biblical prophecy, but the Temple Mount does. Saying it's all acts of blood, and from the Judaic opinion, this will only end when we retake the Temple Mount from the Muslims, dismantle their mosque and the Dome of the Rock, and rebuild their temple. And could also be like now or never in terms of expelling the Gazans is more important politically, even for a secular Israel. But on the religious aspect, and there are a lot of Israelis talking about it now in the belief system, like we're going to win because we're on the right side, and biblical prophecy. But once you have hundreds of thousands of Israeli troops mobilized, once you have large questioning about whether Jews and Arabs could get along in Israel together, certainly there's plans. There's been popular movies made about it. I definitely talked with Israelis and Jews all the time that had like quasi plans, and possibly dissident Haredi parts of the IDF that probably have plans for storming the Temple Mount and expelling the Arabs from Jerusalem, and actually rebuilding the temple. So I mean that, but I would say if you did the polling, like probably like the majority of Israelis want to expel the Gazans, and maybe even a vast majority. At this point, it could already be like 75% of Israelis. You're basically like the solution is kicking them out, and the only problem, what's hindering peace, is the other nations or Egypt. And that's the problem right now with Israel and the ground invasion, because they need that humanitarian corridor to open up into the Sinai Peninsula. And if it's not, and maybe Colin has something useful to say on that, but the temple is important, and from the Judaic perspective, like this will not end until we control the temple and rebuild ours.
Yeah, I don't
Yep.
see any political possibility of that happening. By that I mean the Palestinians being driven into Sinai and Gaza becoming emptied in that way. And I don't think the Temple Mount is going to be taken over by the Jews either, because if that actually happened, that would spark off a general conflagration, and all the other Muslim countries would come straight in. So there are certain parameters and limitations on what can happen. And so there is a kind of structure to this rather chaotic conflict that limits what the various actors and players can do. And so what
the Adam Green opinion is that the Adam Green no more news conspiracy is that it's going to happen under Trump. And so say the war in Gaza continues for another through the election another year, and then Trump would be in office, and Trump would back Israel enough to say that if Israel takes over the Temple Mount, that America would have a strong enough backing of Israel to create World War III and Armageddon. But at this point, you're right. But if possibly Trump got back in office, or you had some extremely strong Republican that was just going to back Israel taking over the Temple Mount, and telling the Muslim Arab nations, like, yes, we will go to war to defend Israel.
But Trump doesn't have that much political freedom, and there's a kind of structure to America's geopolitical position, and they can't just go willy-nilly supporting the Jews taking over the Temple Mount and pissing off all their Arab allies and pissing off the Saudis and everybody else. It's not going to happen. It would cause.
It's pissing off, but it's saying you try to buy them off.
It would cause so many problems for the Americans. First of all, the whole Middle East would be up in arms anyway, and then Trump would be committing America.
Well, you could argue they're always like that anyway. So
I know. But then you'd have Trump trying to commit America to maintaining the peace on behalf of Israel, so that Israel could enjoy their new territorial gains. It just wouldn't work. So I think
whether it wouldn't work, but it's saying, is it conceivable that you could have like a crusader type mentality take over the presidency, and even if it's politically not viable, that there would be enough mass support in America for holy wars?
Well, I don't think Trump's
you even have your avatar like
case, is he?
I mean, crusader. I don't know if you're a knight or a crusader, but saying
that is ironic, actually. And I don't think Trump's that type of person. I mean, obviously, this is the thing that people often criticize him for. He's not actually as religious as some of the people he tries to, pander to. And in fact, he's obviously a totally non-religious person who just pretends to be aligned with the evangelical right.
Oh no, there's a lot of Jewish influence in his circles, dude.
I mean, we were discussing before you came on, like
but even the Jewish circles in America. I mean, they're very divided about Netanyahu. They obviously think this is not the way to to protect Jewish interests. They think that Bibi is getting everything completely wrong. He's actually creating a lot of antipathy and a lot of anti-Jewish feeling, and Israel's just become this vast generator of anti-Semitism in the world.
Well, it's only because you're sort of say wimps against the Muslims, even like the Hindu Indian support, and just saying like the Temple Mount is clearly a Jewish site. Like, even though obviously the Muslims are pissed and wouldn't want to give it up and might even go to war for it. Like, it's clearly historically a Jewish site, and it clearly makes sense that the Jews want it back. And
I think historically it's a Roman site. Come on, and then
well,
it's
I mean, it
also
might
a
be
Christian
a whole
site.
bunch,
I mean,
but just saying,
everybody's had a piece of the Temple Mount.
I mean, you do agree that from the Judaic perspective, this doesn't end until we get the Temple Mount back. That
This is
like
this is the eschatology that you're
I don't
dealing
think. I don't think.
now, how
most
could you have the
Jews
state of Israel where you have
actually
a
believe
mosque?
that bullshit?
But even that bullshit, I'm just saying, like, even if you're a secular Israeli, that the historic center of Jewish Israeli culture is controlled by another group, another culture.
Yeah, but that's God's will. Come on, if you're a religious Jew, the fact that the Temple Mount is in the hands of the Muslims is obviously just Jehovah's will. So you
But
just
I'm
have
saying,
to,
'cause we're
as a good
defeated
religious
people.
Jew, you have to
But you're saying
you
we're
have to
defeated.
immediately accept that, Doovid. You know.
No, but I'm saying that I accept that we're in Golos, we're defeated people, but we will only not be a defeated people when that blotch is removed and we regain control. So I'm saying, yes, we're defeated right now, but I don't want to be a defeated people. I want the glory of the ancient Israel to rise again, and that necessitates the change of control of the Temple
Oh
Mount.
no, but you've got to sit there patiently and wait for the Messiah to do all that for you.
Well, I mean, you could give that theological perspective, but I mean, you do agree to some respect that this doesn't end until the Jews get control of that Temple Mount back.
This is true.
Or
And
it
the
could end
Muslims
in
won't give it back.
It could end in
The Jews aren't going to give up. The
number
Jews
of
aren't going
other
to stop.
ways.
The Jews aren't going to stop at less than that. I mean, you can
Well,
say,
I
okay,
think,
we're defeated.
it
It's
all
not going to
depends.
work
It all-
now. It's going to cause
Look,
World War
they
III.
stopped before for 2,000 years, didn't they? So
Well, because
you know,
we were
so-
scared because we by saying it, but
So
we kept at
stopping
it.
is not out of the question.
No, I'm saying it's just a temporarily. Now is not the time. I mean, Jews have never stopped. It's just been temporarily. Now is not the time. But relatively.
I'm finding this debate a bit retarded, to be honest. I mean, it can end in all sorts of ways. This idea that the Jews have to return to the Temple Mount and
I was
rebuild
enjoying
the
it.
temple and blah blah blah. It's all some sort of larpy fantasy, really, and you know it.
No, I mean, that's the point I'm making. That even if you say now is not the time, or geopolitically, that is say like no, at some point the Jews do have to regain control of that site. How it happens?
Well, they're willing. I mean, if they're willing to try, you know, go for it. Let's see what happens.
Well, who say they aren't going for it right now? I made the point
they're not.
before.
They're sort of what they're doing now. It's not. It doesn't seem to be a kind of concerted plan. I mean, it's things going wrong because they don't have a plan. I made the point.
Netanyahu's
been bumbling forward for a number of years. He's been trying to stay on top of Israeli politics, and he's been pandering to these right-wing religious nutcases, and he's been slowly edging into the West Bank and building little settlements here and there, little pinpricks into the West Bank, and he's been weakening Israel's international position by doing this, and he's also weakened the Gazan border by, expanding into the West Bank, because all those settlements dotted around the West Bank, that creates an incredibly long border to defend, and that's why the Hamas were able to attack so successfully, because Netanyahu had to strip the border so that he could protect all these settlements. So the guy is bumbling around, and there's no concerted plan.
There's some caveats you have to put into that, which is
let me add just a point of order on this. Netanyahu is 74 years old. Most people believed he had a heart attack just this last summer, and he could die. Like, Israel is currently at war. They currently have a unity government, and if he died or could no longer be prime minister, you could have someone put in charge that does know what they're doing and could possibly implement a plan for not only a mass expulsion of the Gazans, but a taking of Jerusalem, a full taking of Jerusalem, and other factors. And it should be accounted for that.
But that would be like declaring war on the entire Muslim world. So I don't really think that would work.
Yeah, a couple of aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean, and he could just.
You do agree that Netanyahu could go at any time. mean, 74, he had a heart attack this summer.
Well, that's
And
what you get.
what happens if he goes? Is he likely to be replaced by someone more extreme, someone more religious, and possibly someone who does have more of a plan?
Naftali Bennett, maybe.
Well, he wimped out also. I mean, Naftali Bennett kind of wimped out because he was supposed to be like a West Banker, and Naftali Bennett actually openly had plans for expulsion. That when he ran for Knesset, he ran on a position of expulsion, but once he became prime minister, kind of like wimped out and didn't accomplish anything. But that someone could actually rise, that if you're an Israeli, wouldn't be scared.
Well, that's the problem. If somebody comes in, somebody who's driven, somebody who has a plan, somebody who's like Netanyahu, but turbocharged in some way, that's not going to work either, because what we're dealing with here is a kind of contradictory position. Israel's position is contradictory, and if you drive that position, the contradictions come out. And so the best thing that Israel can do is to kind of like take the heat out of the situation, to de-escalate as much as possible, because then the contradictions don't rub up against each other. If you try to resolve this contradictory position that Israel occupies, then those contradictions become very, very live and vivid, and that will then cause the destruction of Israel.
Yeah, the problem is though, Colin, you're thinking with logic and reason, and that region of the world suffers from a lack of that. And this,
yes, but they still have to submit to certain geopolitical laws.
So
unless it becomes a three-front war, and saying, because I'm following all aspects of the Israeli crisis, and I've heard some of the Chabad rabbis or something and say like, well, yeah, it's only when Hezbollah and Iran enter the war that then storming Jerusalem and taking the Temple Mount will become viable. Yeah, and so that's a small element. It might only be like 10% of Israelis, but there is 10% of Israelis that are planning and plotting for that right now.
Yeah, but nobody wants to fight for Israel. I mean, America doesn't want to fight for Israel.
Well, all they have to do is bomb. I'm saying Israel has 400 soldiers called up, and like relatively, they got a lot of bombs. Like if you're saying the Muslim world is unlikely to go to war on the ground against Israel.
We're talking about how extremely difficult.
You say, what's the Muslim world going to do?
Yeah, but look, we're talking about how extremely difficult it would be to actually attack Gaza, which is this like tiny sliver of land. Israel is basically kind of shitting its pants at the prospect of going into this tiny sliver of land. And then in addition to that, you want to sort of declare war on the rest of the Arab and Muslim world. Doovid, that's
no, that's not.
Obviously,
let me just interject here.
Framing it in 4 words. David, I agree with you. Israel is cold feet right now, and that's why they're not doing it. They're scared, and they're not ready for the big casualties. But taking the Temple Mount is not going to war against the Muslim world.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, David. If in a situation where it was a blitzkrieg type event, because Hamas, Iran are drawn into the war, that Israel just says, okay, we're taking the Temple Mount, whatever. And would that satisfy your Jewish eschatology that the Temple has been restored, etc.? Would that count? Would that count as fulfillment? And then if that does, what happens then if the war still continues? How does that? What does that mean for your eschatology and philosophy?
According to most of the rabbis, Colin is right. It has to be like Messiah, and first there has to be world peace and universal recognition of God. But on a political level, of what some of element of the Israeli messianic people, they would take the Temple Mount, they would erect some sort of structure, and start bringing sacrifices and offerings. So if God reject those, and so Colin's right about the general theology of, but politically, one thing like taking the Temple Mount would be a much smaller military operation than taking Gaza. I'm saying there's only like 300,000 Arabs in Jerusalem, and there's only like tens of thousands, maybe not even that. There might even be less than 10,000 Arabs in the old city. so that like from a military operation standpoint, taking the Temple Mount is not that difficult. You could probably do that with 5,000 troops compared to the 2 million people in Gaza. And then the question, would the Muslim world actually do something about it? I mean, Israel has taken the Temple Mount multiple times. They prevented worshipers. They've raided the temple. But if they just long term shut it down and then started dismantling the Islamic structures there, and erected their own structure, maybe the Muslim countries would go to war. Whether they can do a ground campaign, they're going to send bombs. I mean, very possible. But just in terms
It'd
of
only work if
military
they built a Hindu temple on top of it. Then they
well,
could
I'd say
get the
just from a
support of
military
India.
operation, it wouldn't be that complicated to take the Temple Mount. You could probably even do that with
everybody agrees with that point, Doovid. But the point is what happens after that, because Israel's a country that depends upon the goodwill of the world in order to survive.
Yeah, but most of the world now is secular, and they wouldn't. Most people wouldn't care. I would, especially the young.
I don't think that's true. That's not what we've seen on the streets of all these cities in the last few days. We've seen vast crowds
but there will be
coming out
less pictures of babies being blown to pieces by seizing the Temple Mount, and in that case, Israel and Judaism has achieved its strategic goals. And so have everyone look at Gaza, use that as a feint, and then boom, you take the Temple Mount.
Yeah, and then you can say that would be our shrine, in the sense of, instead of having the defeated people, that the centerpiece of our country is someone else's shrine, and then people around the world would come to pay pilgrimage to our temple.
I think we're really going in circles here, because we all know that all the Arab countries would notice that. And they would object quite strongly,
sure,
in quite physical and military terms.
Obviously,
let's bring it back. Let's bring it back then to something more material on the ground that we can all understand. What do we think that this left woke coalition that currently is like supporting Joe Biden and the Democrats, who are currently in charge for the next year, are going to tolerate this? Does it matter? Colin, what are your thoughts on that? Is this going to break the Biden administration or not? And does it matter?
I'm sorry to throw in. I'll give it to you. Just say that from some perspective, it's the most reasonable point the woke culture have, is being pro-Palestine. Of all the other positions, being pro-Palestine is the most legitimate of all their positions.
Colin, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, it's a bit like the Black Lives Matter thing. They have to go along with it to a certain extent, but at the same time, Joe Biden is an establishment politician, and the political establishment in America, and also to Britain to a large degree, is kind of they have to sort of side with Israel for structural reasons, which date back to the 1970s. And so Biden's trying to sort of balance two things. He wants to show support for the Palestinians and for their aspirations for statehood, but also he's trying to be a friend of Israel. And so it's an almost impossible task to do, but he's got to make the effort. And if anything breaks down, he's got to make it look like it wasn't his fault. So if it doesn't work, it's somebody else's fault. So it's either Netanyahu's fault or it's the Palestinians' fault. But he's got to make the effort of trying to be even-handed, and I think he's, seems to be trying to do that to the best of his ability. But the American government's got commitments to both the Palestinians and the Israelis in a case like this.
Well, here's what I see happening. There's a degree of instability within the West right now. How come we've been dragged into multiple front wars? How come we're seeing, take the erosion of the cultures and the fabric of European countries, etc. In that chaos, I could see, as we were just discussing, Israel, Jews taking the Temple Mount, fulfilling their prophecy. Whether Messiah comes down or not, they've got their third temple, and whether they can hang on to it or not. I can't see Muslim countries being able to do much beyond throw missiles. They're not going to be able to mount ground invasions. The US would relish the thought of being able to justifiably, in their mind, pick off armored columns racing across flat terrain in deserts.
Yeah, but really, is that true? Because look at the damage Hamas has done in recent days, and look at the damage that Hezbollah have done, and these aren't even countries.
Yeah, well, they're not. But once America gets involved in that instance, so Hezbollah starts launching and trying to attack the northern border. You've got however many ground troops,
and this whole thing creates a giant steaming turd in almost every Western country, because all these Western countries now have large Muslim populations.
Yeah, they're reliant on that.
And everything that happens in Palestine now reverberates to all these European capitals. And so, we can't, countries like Britain and France and America, we can't allow Netanyahu to gung-ho do what the fuck he likes, because the blowback comes straight back to all these Western countries.
Hence the long-term plan to flood them with Muslims, etc., because they we get neutered in that respect, where we would have to contain the unrest on our own streets. We would have guerrilla insurgencies. Well, I think we've had guerrilla insurgencies for a long time, but they would become far more intense.
It's just another factor that really kind of limits what people like Netanyahu can do. There are very strong structural limitations to what these various actors can achieve.
Yeah, I think you're thinking too much in the you're not thinking in terms of the eschatology and what would be
definitely
achieved.
No. The idea that some religious lunatics can willy-nilly go off and decide to do this without consequences and ignore the consequences, I don't think that's going to work. So I think the people who step out of line will be pulled up quite sharply. That's what I think.
In European countries,
already, you've already been replaced in your own country. Let alone now you're talking about what the
steady with that replacement stuff.
You're talking about like, the elites aren't going to allow this, and saying like you're speaking as a dissident who is at odds with the elites. But now you're talking like you know the mind of the elites, and the fact is that like no one did anything when you were replaced in your own country, but all of a sudden you think something's going to happen in Israel. Like the global elites are going to stand up to stop what's happening in Israel, but they didn't stop when you were replaced in your own country.
Look, Doooovid, you seem to still think that Israel is this omnipotent force that can do what the fuck it likes. And
no, I'm looking at Israel from a practical military perspective.
What this Gaza conflict demonstrates is that they have a very hard job tackling what one little tiny city state can do to them.
Yeah, man, you're the one who's playing war games on behalf of Muslims that you don't represent, and saying yes, Gaza.
I'm not playing war games. I'm just pointing out the obvious. And it should be obvious to you too.
They said they're not going to stand for this. They will stop it. And saying like, well, I'm not so sure they were.
Why do you think Bibi hasn't actually gone in? One of the reasons he hasn't gone in is probably because he's got Joe Biden telling him to kind of cool it.
I'm not so sure. I mean, I told you I don't think they went in because the plan A right now is still to expel Gazans to the Sinai Peninsula. And like obviously Israelis are scared.
Oh, that's not going to happen. That's not on the menu of reality. I think you're just.
Well, that's your supposition. We'll see.
But I'm pretty confident when I say that, though.
But you're a dissident. What does your confidence matter? I'm saying your own elites replaced you without, in your opinion, you weren't able to stop that. How could you be?
We're not even talking about that, Doowovid.
Yeah, but I'm saying, what does it mean that you're confident? You're confident, not in your own power. You're not going to stop them.
Well,
you're not saying I'm confident that I would stop them.
Let me put it this way:
other people would stop them.
Let me put it this way: a country that can't even tackle this tiny city-state on its own isn't going to be able to take on the rest of the world and ignore the wishes of the most powerful nations in the world. So that's what I'm saying.
Your supposition that they have to face the rest of the world, when it appears that it's a conspiracy that involves the UK, Germany, and the US, and that even the rest of the world is appears to be trying to force Egypt to allow the corridor.
Okay,
into
so
the Sinai.
you think there's a big conspiracy where everybody's actually on BB's side? Okay,
No,
that's
no,
a
not,
nice
I mean,
Not,
you're
not
crackpot theory
necessarily on
there.
BB's side, Colin, but
I mean, to me,
let me ask
BB
you
is
a
irrelevant.
question. Can I ask Colin a question? Do you think that within elite structures within the Europoid and the Americas that messianics are have significant control over the levers of power? And I'll just, as an example, we saw as Trump came in and we had Boris Johnson, they made the move to put embassies into Jerusalem. That would have been seen as a prophetic signal among many individuals and groups that this is all God's will acting out. And if that's the case, why Doovid's point stands. What can the Muslims do? Shut off oil? Okay, well, we can take natural gas. We're moving away from those sort of economies anyway. I could well see a position where those that are believers would welcome Israel taking the Temple Mount, because in two of the three eschatologies, Christianity, Judaism, that would be a sign that this coming messianic age is upon us.
Oh yeah, so I mean, there are religious lunatics in every society. There are Muslims who are obviously religious lunatics, and Jews who are obviously religious lunatics, and Christians who are obviously religious lunatics. But I don't think they're actually running their countries. The people that are at the top are quite secular people. They're quite cynical, Machiavellian people, and they're not at all living in some sort of religious fantasy like you suppose.
Yeah, but from a Machiavellian perspective, why not do that? And you could.
I mean, you sound like you're you sound like you're a bit religious yourself, and you actually believe some of these ideas. Maybe Doovid does, but I even doubt that. I mean, Doovid is obviously playing a character, and he's a much loved character on the internet, but nobody actually thinks Doovid is a genuine believing Jew.
Well, some do, but I mean, even if that's the case, like, okay, I studied in Israel, but the polling of the sentiment, if you think like Netanyahu, the opinion and the supplication that as I mentioned, that taking the Temple Mount is much easier than taking Gaza, and in this kind of like, well, what's the world players going to do? How are world leaders going to react? We don't know. That's just supplication.
Yeah, I think we've covered that already. We've kind of gone around that circle a few times already, Doovid. So yeah, the Temple.
Yeah, Mount, I mean, you're just insistent, like, these players are going to do this, and then if Kevin or me saying, well,
I just do that. Highly likely that there would Israel would face a lot of backlash if it did something like that, and it already is facing a lot of backlash. So
Israel's been facing backlash for decades, and
I mean, this is. Yeah, but it is getting worse, because before Israel was it was much cleverer at how it presented itself. It was first of all, it presented itself as a much more left-wing country, so it was able to minimize opposition from the Soviet bloc, and it was also able to appeal to a lot of left-wing people in Western countries, and it was also able to pretend that it was a kind of friendly society to Arabs. And this position, this kind of very complex game that Israel has played over the years, it's sort of lost a lot of nuance. It's become much more hollowed out and fragile in its approach to the rest of the world. This is so Netanyahu, he's presented as a strong man, but he's actually weakened Israel's position, because he's created a lot of unnecessary opposition, and he's exacerbated a lot of the tensions and the contradictions in Israel's situation.
But Israel's already called up 400,000 troops.
I actually, hang on, let me just check if because my kids have to get ready for school, but the wife says she wasn't feeling well, so they might just take a day off. Let me just check on that situation. And
yeah, sure.
if there's kids got to get ready for school, I'm gonna have to pull the ripcord. But if not, I'll come back in a few minutes.
We appreciate you joining. If you want to,
I might come back. I don't hear much activity, so
well, we are kind of going in circles at the moment, so I think that's.
Well, let me ask you, Colin, while you're here, what do you think about this, the rising of so-called anti-Semitism in Western countries in response to this? There's two schools of thought that I'm seeing on Telegram and on the distant right. They're arguing about whether this could be mobilized in favor down the line of like achieving old alt-right ideals of maybe, if the governments get to the point where they say, look, well, we're going to deport you for anti-Semitism, that opens the door of deportation, and then basically anything's on the table. Go
sorry,
ahead,
gents.
Kevin,
I do have to do a runner. Colin, nice to meet you. Stephen, nice to meet you. Colin,
Yeah,
I'd love
same
to
here, Kevin.
I'd love to have a chat about these issues on another stream. I don't know. Doooovid can act as a conduit for.
Stephen can give you if you're both on Twitter.
Sure.
Do you follow me on Twitter, Stephen?
I'm not sure, but I'll just quickly share my Twitter page, and you can
find Kevin's link from my profile and connect Colin
Cool.
if you want to stream together. But, appreciate you coming on, and you meet Doovid's British contemporaries or colleagues.
That's me on Twitter, and anybody who's watching on Kevin's channel over there, the 100 new viewers, you could come on over to the SJJ channel on YouTube. Feel free.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys, and hopefully speak to you all another day. Take care.
All right. Cool. Thank you, Kevin.
All right. Bye-bye. How do I get out of it? Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there is the aspect of how Israel is more committed than it's ever been in the past. I mean, they already have formally declared war. They've already called up 400,000, or maybe it's only 250,000, but they already have 400,000 troops mobilized, of which like hundreds of thousands of them are outside of Gaza. They're already doing countless raids out of the West Bank. They've already evacuated the whole northern Lebanon border. They've already exchanging a bombing campaign. The U.S. has already mobilized more than it has since. I think I'm not sure about bringing the fleet. It's possible like during the Lebanon war, but it could be that the U.S. is more mobilized on behalf of Israel than it's been since 1973, or God forbid the USS Liberty. And it's unclear how Israel winds down, and then also that Israel has already displaced over close to 1 million Palestinians in Gaza. So I mean, it's going to be difficult to wind this down.
Well, if we're just addressing whether it's going to kick off again, just I'm concerned that it's going to kick off.
War has already been declared. They've already been mobilized. According to everybody, any day now, the ground invasion is going to occur. They're already right there at the border, hundreds of thousands of them.
Yeah, but what does victory look like in this case?
Well, yeah, I mean that's a good question, but you're saying that how does this get wind down? I'm saying like you can't, like Israel has never been.
It doesn't get wind down. It gets into a kind of quagmire, and then everybody gets sick of it, and then it, you patch together another, pointless ceasefire.
We're just saying to go home. Yeah, I mean currently Netanyahu.
And then at some point, everybody blames Netanyahu for this mess, and then he gets kicked out of politics.
Well, right now you have a unity coalition. So I mean, the possibility of something happened to Netanyahu, and then the war went on without him, versus like if it returned to a political process. So the war right now, the unity coalition, is dependent on war. And although Netanyahu is the head of it, he's not necessarily the commander in chief for the army. He's just the prime minister. And the military decisions are not being made by Netanyahu. And So whether that,
Well, I think they are, because these military decisions have to be signed off by the political leadership. So
what he's saying is to sign off.
if it was completely up to the military, they would probably be in there by now. But they
he just
obviously
signs
aren't.
off. He's not making this. He just has to sign off on it. And Stephen opened the stream with his speech, and Netanyahu unequivocally said, like, we're going, just any day now. Netanyahu did not leave any doubt that the military operation might be called
This is
off.
what's concerning me, that it's taken 19 days. There's been lots of rational talk about it. And Biden said, look, it'd be a mistake to go into Gaza. And then lots of people are talking rationally about it, how even you, David, when you were on my stream saying, the lives that would be lost would be so difficult, such a difficult thing. I think Kevin, when he was on, he likened it. Was it Kevin who likened it? It'd be a Bakhmut situation, or maybe that was you, Colin.
Well, there's all sorts of degrees to which they could go in. I mean, they could have a kind of token incursion, go in and blow up a few buildings here and there, and then get out again, or they could go in and try to hunt down every last Hamas member in all those in the rubble and the tunnels, losing possibly tens of thousands of Israeli soldiers in the process. So there are degrees to which they can actually tick that box. So I think it's quite likely they will go in, even if only as a kind of token incursion. But to actually really go in and to kind of extirpate all the members of Hamas, that's a completely different kettle of fish.
What about the 1 million people that have already been displaced? You think eventually they pull out and they go back and rebuild the rubble?
Well, there's a lot of people who have been displaced, but they're still all in Gaza, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed that at length in saying that Israel has been deterred from their plan A, which was the corridor into the Sinai Peninsula, and whether that forces them to whether if you're right in that it's just impossible. There's no way that happens if they do the invasion, even without the civilian corridor into the Sinai Peninsula.
A lot depends upon the Palestinians as well, because if you have a situation where life is made so unpleasant for the Palestinians without actually massacring or killing or starving them, then at some point they're going to get a bit fed up with the situation, and they might then turn on Hamas themselves, and that would obviously be the optimum solution for Israel if they could get the Palestinians themselves to expunge Hamas.
How could they do that once they've already fled? So I mean, presumably, if the 1 million people
what I mean is,
how do they turn on Hamas?
They haven't fled out. They're staying in Gaza. Gaza is this containment camp for all these Palestinians, right?
But they fled to the south.
And so if this
Gaza.
goes on for several months and life is extremely unpleasant for, say, 4, 5, 6 months, then a lot of the Palestinians might start to get a bit fed up with the situation. They might start to think the only way to solve this is to get rid of Hamas and then to bring back Fatah, for example. So, that would be the optimum solution if the Israelis could create a kind of kettle situation where they kind of boil the Palestinians until the Palestinians decide to get rid of Hamas.
But just practically, that how are they? If the Palestinians have already overwhelmingly left northern Gaza, and Hamas are the main ones left in northern Gaza, how are they going to get rid of Hamas in northern Gaza when they've already left?
Well, I think there's plenty of civilians still in northern Gaza, and Hamas can choose to go where the civilians are, and that would force the Israelis to keep bombing civilians, which also works in Hamas's favor. And so there are very clear limits to what each side can do, and there are some possibilities, but there's no certainty.
And what about analysis that maybe the axis of Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran have a stage 2 to this, and a speculation about if they do have a stage 2, what is their stage 2?
Well, I think it's highly likely that if significant damage is done to the civilian population in Gaza, that you'll see some sort of involvement from other groups.
What is the possibility, the chances? I know you might just think this is going like crazy talk, Colin, but just you and me, what are the chances of something like another USS Liberty or something? If the Israelis think, well, we can't do anything here, we need to get America involved, we just have to do it, this is our chance. Do you think there's any chance of that whatsoever?
No, because it would be too obvious. If it was a false flag, everything's under very, very deep surveillance. It's not 1973 anymore.
Yeah, but the hospital, I'm saying still, I mean, I don't know if you had an opinion on what happened with the Gaza hospital, but you still have completely.
I think we still don't know
narratives
about the
I
hospital.
think it's looking like it was Israeli, but there is still a lot of disagreement.
That's
about
not the
that.
narrative in the U.S. And the U.S. is almost completely going with that. It was, Gazan. It was, Palestinian jihad.
Well, I don't think the U.S. doesn't believe that. The U.S. government probably have a very clear idea of what happened, but I think out of politeness, they decided to pretend that the Israeli story was maybe the correct one.
Well, I mean, it goes control the narrative, so that if the mainstream media and the State Department and the president and the majority of senators and Congress people are going with the Israeli narrative, although the U.S. itself and the New York Times, the most left-leaning of the papers is still saying there's doubt of who did it. We can't determine yet.
I think the New York Times came out and said the Israeli story was hooey.
Well, I'm saying that's the most
left-leaning
today of the mainstream media.
Channel 4 in the UK were quite clear that it was an Israeli projectile that caused that damage.
But not.
I'll be honest with you. I'm concerned that this is going to be one of those topics that is like made illegal to have a wrong opinion about on YouTube. The bombing of that hospital.
Well, it's like the USS Liberty. I mean, to say like that, if it becomes like that, to say that, okay, I mean, just Colin's point about social media and all this stuff. We have social media and all this point, and there's still the question that saying it's still possible you could do a false flag even with social media and all the public journalism.
Okay, yeah, fair point, Doowovid, actually. Fair point, maybe. In the age of media, it's just what kind of the media story that gets spun initially that matters rather than the actual thing that caused it. That hospital bombing did get spun absolutely one way and then started to look a different way. I'm going to hold off on judgment on it again. Again, I'm concerned that it's going to be made one of those topics you're not allowed to have a contrary opinion on.
But you don't even need a false flag for this to escalate. I mean, it might just escalate of its own accord because of the dynamic that we're involved in with Netanyahu under pressure to do something, and then that causing enough casualties that Hezbollah feel they have to jump into the game.
Yeah.
Yeah,
how many 9/11s?
Anyway, guys, I've got to be going too. So it's been fun chatting about this light-hearted subject matter.
Okay, yeah,
thank you for coming on, Colin.
Okay, SJJ, Doowovid. See you next
reach
time.
out
Bye-bye.
to Kevin. You probably have some interesting conversations with him.